$2.50. That's all Jacob Hartwell had left when he heard the desperate voice calling from the old mine shaft. But what he didn't know was that the girl trapped down there carried a secret worth more than all the gold in Colorado territory, and saving her would make him the most hunted man in the West. The voice echoed up from the abandoned Copper Creek mine, weak but unmistakably female. Jacob had been riding past the old workings when he heard it, barely audible over the wind whistling through the pine trees. Most men would have kept riding. The mine had been sealed for 3 years after the cave-in that killed 17 men. Nobody went near it anymore. But something about that voice stopped him cold. "Help me," came the call again, fainter this time. "Please somebody help me." Jacob dismounted and approached the mine entrance. The wooden supports had rotted and debris blocked most of the opening, but there was a gap, just wide enough for someone small to have fallen through. "How long have you been down there?" he called. "I don't know," came the reply. "Since yesterday, maybe longer. I can't see the sky." Jacob studied the opening. It would be dangerous to go down there. The whole structure could collapse, but he couldn't ride away knowing someone was trapped. "I'm coming down," he called. "Stay where you are." He tied his rope to his saddle horn and lowered himself into the darkness. 20 feet down, his boots touched solid ground. The air was thick and stale, but he could hear breathing nearby. "Over here," the voice said. Jacob struck a match and saw her in the flickering light. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, with auburn hair and green eyes that reflected the flame. Her dress was torn and dirty, but something about her seemed wrong. The dress was too fine for these parts, made of silk that must have cost more than most people made in a year. But what caught his attention wasn't the expensive dress, it was the way she held herself. Despite being trapped in a mine for who knows how long, she carried herself like royalty. "What's your name?" Jacob asked, helping her to her feet.
She hesitated.
Just for a moment. Sarah Coleman." The pause was slight, but Jacob caught it. She was lying about her name. "But why? How did you end up down here, Miss Coleman?" I was running away from my husband. He's a cruel man."
She looked up at him with those green eyes.
"Are you going to turn me in?" Jacob studied her face. There were no bruises, no marks of abuse that he could see.
And
that dress.
It wasn't the kind of clothing a woman would wear to run away from anything.
"No," he said finally. "I'm not going to turn you in. Let's get you out of here." But as he helped her climb the rope, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah Coleman wasn't telling him the truth, and he had no idea that this lie would lead him into the deadliest game of his life. They rode into Broken Creek just as the sun was setting. It was a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. Jacob hadn't been there long enough for people to stop staring when he walked down the street. He was just another drifter, another man with no past and no future. "There's a boarding house," he told Sarah as they dismounted in front of Mrs. Patterson's place. "You can get a room and some food." Sarah looked at the modest building and something flickered across her face. Distaste, fear, Jacob couldn't tell. "I don't have any money," she said quietly. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out his last $2.50. He'd been planning to buy supplies and maybe a hot meal. Instead, he handed it all to her. "This should cover a few nights," he said. Sarah stared at the money like she'd never seen cash before, which was odd, because someone wearing a dress that expensive should know all about money. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back. I promise." Jacob was about to say she didn't need to when the sound of horses stopped him. 3 riders were coming hard down the main street, their mounts lathered with sweat. They pulled up right in front of the boarding house. The leader was a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes. He wore expensive suit and carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The other 2 looked like hired guns. "Excuse me," the bearded man called out. "We're looking for someone. A young woman with red hair. Have you seen anyone like that?" Jacob felt Sarah tense beside him. Her face had gone pale. "Lots of women have red hair," Jacob said carefully. "Anyone in particular?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Her name is Victoria Ashford. She's my ward. She ran away from home and we're concerned for her safety." Jacob glanced at Sarah. "Victoria Ashford, not Sarah Coleman." Another lie. "Haven't seen anyone by that name," Jacob said. The bearded man studied them both for a long moment. His gaze lingered on Sarah, and Jacob saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "If you do see her," the man said slowly, "there's a substantial reward. $1,000. $1,000. That was more money than Jacob had ever seen, more than most people in Broken Creek would see in their entire lives. "We'll keep that in mind," Jacob said. The bearded man touched his hat brim. "Much obliged. By the way, I'm Marcus Ashford. Victoria is, she's not well. Sometimes she doesn't know who she is or where she belongs. It's important that we find her before she hurts herself." With that he wheeled his horse around and rode off with his men. But Jacob noticed they didn't go far. They stopped at the saloon across the street, where they could watch the boarding house. "He's lying," Sarah whispered as soon as they were out of earshot. "About what?" "Everything. I'm not his ward. I'm not sick." She looked up at Jacob with desperate eyes. "He's trying to kill me." "Why would he want to kill you?" Sarah opened her mouth then closed it again. "It's complicated." Everything about this woman was complicated. False names, expensive clothes, men with guns looking for her, and now talk of murder. Jacob had saved her life, but he was starting to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. "Maybe you should tell me the truth," he said. Sarah looked across the street at Marcus Ashford and his men. They were settling in at the saloon, clearly planning to wait. "Not here," she said. "Too many years. Can we go somewhere private?" Jacob led her to the small church at the end of the street. It was empty at this hour, and the thick walls would muffle their voices. They sat in the back pew, shadows playing across their faces in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. "My real name is Victoria Ashford," Sarah began, "but Marcus isn't my guardian. He's my cousin." So he was telling the truth about that part. "No," Victoria's voice was bitter. "He's my father's brother's son. But that's not why he's hunting me." She took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago I discovered that I'm the sole heir to the largest silver fortune in Colorado territory." Jacob frowned. "What's wrong with that? Most people would be happy to inherit a fortune. You don't understand. The silver mines, the land, the businesses, it's all worth millions of dollars. And Marcus has been managing it all since my father died 5 years ago." The pieces started to fall into place in Jacob's mind. "And he doesn't want to give it up. He's been stealing from the estate for years. If I claim my inheritance and bring in auditors, he'll go to prison, or worse." Victoria's hands were trembling. "So he's been trying to have me declared insane. If he can prove I'm not mentally competent, he keeps control of everything." "But you escaped. I overheard him talking to those 2 men you saw. They weren't planning to take me to an asylum. They were planning to take me somewhere remote and make sure I never came back." Jacob sat back in the pew trying to process what she was telling him. If she was telling the truth, then he'd stumbled into the middle of a murder plot involving millions of dollars. "How do I know you're not lying again?" he asked. Victoria reached into her bodice and pulled out a small leather pouch. She opened it and showed him the contents. There were several documents inside, along with a piece of jewelry that made Jacob's breath catch. It was a ruby necklace, the stones the size of cherries. Even in the dim light of the church it sparkled like liquid fire. Jacob had never seen anything so valuable. "This necklace belonged to my grandmother," Victoria said. "It's worth more than this entire town. And these papers." She unfolded one of the documents. "This is my birth certificate, and this is my father's will leaving everything to me." Jacob studied the papers. They looked official with fancy seals and signatures, but he couldn't read well enough to verify what they said. "Even if this is all true," he said, "what do you expect me to do about it? I'm just a drifter with $2.50 to my name. Help me get to Denver," Victoria said urgently. "There's a lawyer there, William Henderson. He was my father's friend. If I can reach him, he can help me claim what's rightfully mine. And what's in it for me?" Victoria looked him in the eyes. "If you help me get to Denver safely, I'll give you $50,000. Jacob's heart stopped. $50,000. It was an impossible sum, more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "But Jacob," she gripped his arm, "if Marcus catches us, we're both dead. He can't afford to leave any witnesses alive." Before Jacob could respond, they heard the church door creak open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the sanctuary, and Marcus Ashford's voice called out, "I know you're in here, Victoria. And you, stranger, I know you're with her." Jacob and Victoria crouched down behind the pew, but it was too late. Marcus appeared at the end of the aisle, his gun drawn. His 2 men flanked him, their weapons also ready. "Come out now and nobody gets hurt," Marcus said. "Victoria, you're sick, remember? You need help, and you, stranger, you're interfering with family business." Jacob's hand moved slowly toward his gun, but he knew he was outgunned. 3 against 1, and they had the drop on him. That's when Victoria did something that surprised everyone. She stood up. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "Still trying to steal what doesn't belong to you?" Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "There's my dear cousin. We've been so worried about you, especially after you had one of your episodes. The only episode I had was discovering what a thief you are. Now, Victoria, we've talked about these delusions. Dr. Morrison says they're a sign of your condition worsening." Marcus gestured to his men. "Take her gently. We don't want to upset her further." But as the gunman moved forward, Jacob noticed something. Victoria wasn't scared anymore. She was angry, and something about her anger seemed dangerous. "You know what's funny, Marcus?" Victoria said. "You never bothered to read Father's will very carefully, did you?" Marcus paused. "What are you talking about?" "The clause about what happens if anyone tries to harm me or prevent me from claiming my inheritance." Victoria smiled now, and it was her turn to look cold. "Everything goes to the church. All of it. Every mine, every dollar, every piece of property." Marcus's face went white. "You're lying, am I? The will is right here in my bag. Want to read it?" Jacob watched as doubt crept into Marcus's eyes. If Victoria was telling the truth, then killing her wouldn't solve his problem. It would make it infinitely worse. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice was less certain. "Try me." The standoff stretched taut like a wire about to snap. Jacob could feel the tension in the air. Everyone waiting to see who would make the first move. That's when the church door opened again, and Sheriff Davies walked in. "Heard there might be trouble in here," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his gun butt. He was an older man, weathered and cautious, the kind who'd lived long enough to recognize danger when he saw it. Marcus quickly holstered his weapon, his men following suit. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This is a family matter. My cousin is unwell. We're trying to get her the help she needs." Sheriff Davies looked around the church, taking in the scene. His eyes lingered on Victoria, then on Jacob, then on Marcus and his hired guns. "Miss," he said to Victoria, "are you here of your own free will?" "Yes, Sheriff, and I'm in no need of help from my cousin." "She's not thinking clearly," Marcus interjected. "She has spells where she doesn't recognize reality." Sheriff Davies nodded slowly. "I see, and you gentlemen are security," one of Marcus's men answered, "making sure she doesn't hurt herself." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Security, in a church, with drawn guns. An uncomfortable silence fell over the sanctuary. Jacob could see Marcus calculating, trying to figure out how to handle this new complication. "Sheriff," Marcus said carefully, "perhaps we could discuss this privately." Jacob saw Marcus's hand move toward his coat, probably reaching for money to bribe the lawmen, but Sheriff Davies saw it too. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the sheriff said sharply. His gun was in his hand before anyone else could react. "All of you, now see here," Marcus began. "Shut up." The sheriff looked at Victoria again. "Miss, I need to ask you some questions. Are you Victoria Ashford?" Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "And is this man your cousin Marcus?" "Yes." "Is he trying to harm you?" Victoria looked at Marcus, whose face had gone red with anger. "Yes, Sheriff. He's trying to steal my inheritance and have me killed." Marcus exploded. "She's insane. Sheriff, I have medical documents that prove." I said shut up. Sheriff Davies kept his gun trained on Marcus while he thought. "Here's what's going to happen. Miss Ashford, you're going to come with me to the jail where you'll be safe while I sort this out. And you, Mr. Ashford, you and your men are going to leave town. Now, you can't do this." Marcus snarled. "I have legal authority. Not in my town, you don't." The sheriff's voice was steel. "You've got 5 minutes to get out of Broken Creek. If I see you again, I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue further, but facing down the sheriff's gun, he thought better of it. "This isn't over, Victoria," he said as he backed toward the door. "You can't run forever." After Marcus and his men left, Sheriff Davies lowered his gun. About, miss, I need to ask you, is what you said true, about your inheritance and him trying to kill you? Victoria nodded. I have proof. She showed him the documents. The sheriff examined them carefully. These look real enough, but I can't read all the legal language. What I can do is send a telegram to Denver, see if this lawyer Henderson is real. Thank you, Sheriff. Davies turned to Jacob. And you are? Jacob Hartwell. I found Miss Ashford trapped in the old mine. Been trying to help her. Any particular reason? Jacob shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. The sheriff studied them both for a long moment. Well, Mr. Hartwell, looks like you've gotten yourself into quite a situation. Marcus Ashford isn't the kind of man who gives up easy. What do you suggest? Get out of town tonight. Marcus will be back with more men and I won't be able to protect you for... Davies looked at Victoria. Miss, you still planning to go to Denver? Yes, then you better get moving. Take the mountain trail. It's longer but less likely they'll find you. Jacob felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could walk away right now, give Victoria back her money and wash his hands of the whole affair. It would be the smart thing to do, but $50,000 was a lot of money, and despite all the lies and complications he found himself believing her story. I'll take you to Denver, he said. Victoria's face lit up with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Jacob. You won't regret this. As they prepared to leave the church, Sheriff Davies pulled Jacob aside. Son, you sure about this? That woman's trouble no matter what the truth is. And Marcus Ashford has money and connections. If he wants you dead, I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Davies nodded grimly. Then God help you both. An hour later, Jacob and Victoria were riding out of Broken Creek under cover of darkness. They took the mountain trail as the sheriff suggested, winding up through the pine forest toward the high passes. Victoria rode behind him on his horse, her arms around his waist. She changed out of the torn silk dress into more practical traveling clothes that Mrs. Patterson had given her, sturdy woolen cotton that wouldn't tear on branches or show. How long to Denver? She asked. 3, maybe 4 days if we push hard, but we'll have to be careful. If Marcus has half a brain, he'll figure. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the horses' hooves on the rocky trail and the wind in the trees. Jacob found himself thinking about what the sheriff had said. Victoria was trouble. That much was certain. But what, Victoria, he said finally, can I get Victoria, sons, when you were trying that in how did you really end up there? He felt her stiffen behind him. I told you I was running. You froze his wasn't. He mured de Camus in Townford. Lillideford. You couldn't have walked that far in that dress. Victoria was quiet for so long that Jacob wondered if she was going to answer at all. You're right, she said finally. I didn't walk there. Then how? Marcus's men caught me in Silver Creek. They were taking me somewhere to get rid of me, but the wagon wheel broke near the mine, and while they were fixing it I managed to get away. I hid in the mine, but the entrance collapsed behind me, and Marcus's men just left you there. They thought I was buried. When they couldn't find a way in, they assumed I was dead and went back to report to Marcus. Jacob nodded. That made more sense than her original story, but it also meant Marcus thought she was already dead. When he found out she was alive, he's going to be very surprised to learn you survived, Jacob said, and very angry. Victoria's grip tightened around his waist. Jacob, there's something else I need to tell you. Jacob's heart sank. Another revelation. Another complication. What is it? The inheritance. It's not just silver mines and land. My father owned us other things. What kind of other things? Banks, railroad stock, government contracts. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. The total value is closer to $10 million. Jacob nearly fell off his horse. $10 million. It was an impossible sum, more money than some entire states were worth. Jesus Christ, he breathed. If Marcus gets control of that money, he'll be one of the most powerful men in the West. He could buy judges, senators, entire towns. Victoria's voice was urgent now. That's why he can't let me live. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about power. Jacob pulled the horse to a stop. They were on a ridge overlooking the valley below, the lights of Broken Creek just visible in the distance. Victoria, if you're lying to me about any of this, I'm not lying. I swear on my father's grave every word is true. Jacob stared out at the vast wilderness stretching before them. Somewhere in that darkness Marcus Ashford was probably gathering more men, preparing to hunt them down, and they were riding toward Denver with nothing but hope and a handful of legal documents. 50,000 still stands? He asked. 50,000. Jacob spurred the horse forward. Then let's go claim your inheritance. But as they rode deeper into the mountains, neither of them saw the signal fire burning on a distant peak, a fire that told Marcus Ashford exactly which way they were heading. The attack came at dawn on the second day. They had camped in a small clearing beside a mountain stream hidden among the pine trees. Jacob had taken first watch while Victoria slept, but exhaustion had finally overtaken him in the early morning hours. He woke to the sound of horses crashing through the underbrush. Victoria, he shouted, grabbing his rifle. Get down. She rolled behind a fallen log as the first shot rang out. The bullet splintered the tree trunk above her head, showering her with bark fragments. Jacob counted at least 6 riders surrounding their camp. Marcus had brought reinforcements, professional gunmen by the look of them, not the simple thugs he'd had in Broken Creek. Jacob Hartwell, Marcus's voice echoed through the clearing. You've caused me considerable trouble. Jacob fired at the sound of his voice, but Marcus was well hidden behind the trees. The answering volley from the gunman forced Jacob to dive for cover behind a boulder. I have a proposition, Marcus called out. Walk away now and I'll let you live. Stay and you'll die with her. Counter-offer, Jacob shouted back. Go to hell. The gunfight that followed was brief but vicious. Jacob was outnumbered 6-1, but he had better cover, and the advantage of knowing they wanted Victoria alive, which meant they had to be careful with their shots. He managed to drop 2 of the gunmen before his ammunition ran low. That's when Victoria surprised him for the second time. She had a small derringer hidden in her boot, and she knew how to use it. When one of Marcus's men tried to flank them, she put a bullet right between his eyes. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Jacob asked as he reloaded. My father thought a woman should know how to protect herself, she replied calmly, reloading her own weapon. The remaining gunmen had fallen back, regrouping behind a cluster of rocks 50 yards away. Jacob could hear them arguing with Marcus about the best way to proceed. We're pinned down, he told Victoria. Can't stay here for... There's a game trail that leads up the ridge, she said, pointing toward a narrow path barely visible through the trees. If we can reach it, we might be able to get away. That's a lot of open ground to cover. You have a better idea? Jacob didn't. He studied the terrain, calculating angles and distances. If they moved fast and kept low, they might make it. On 3, he said. Run for that big pine tree first, then the rocks, then the trail. Ready? Victoria nodded. 1, 2, 3. They broke cover together, running in a zigzag pattern as bullets whistled around them. Jacob's rifle barked twice more, keeping the gunmen's heads down as they sprinted across the clearing. They made it to the pine tree, then to the rocks. But as they ran for the game trail, Jacob felt something punch him in the shoulder. The impact spun him around and sent him sprawling. Jacob, Victoria screamed. He looked down and saw blood soaking through his shirt. The bullet had gone clean through, but it hurt like hell and his left arm was useless. Keep going, he gasped. Don't stop for me. But Victoria didn't abandon him. She grabbed his good arm and helped him to his feet, half dragging him toward the trail as Marcus's men closed in behind them. They stumbled up the narrow path, Victoria supporting most of Jacob's weight. Behind them they could hear the gunmen crashing through the getting closer with every step. The trail led to a narrow ledge that ran along the face of a cliff.
It was treacherous footing with a sheer drop on one side and solid rock on the other. But it was also too narrow for horses, which gave them an advantage. They made it maybe 100 yards along the ledge before they heard Marcus's voice echoing off the cliff walls. "There's nowhere to run, Victoria. Give up now and I'll make it quick." Jacob was getting weaker from blood loss. His vision was starting to blur and he was having trouble staying on his feet. Victoria was practically carrying him now. "Leave me," he mumbled. "Save yourself." "Shut up," she snapped. "I'm not leaving you." They reached a point where the ledge widened into a small platform. There was nowhere else to go. The trail ended here, blocked by a rock slide that looked decades old. "Dead end," Jacob said. Victoria looked around desperately. That's when she noticed something carved into the rock. Symbols that looked almost like writing. "Jacob, look at this." He followed her gaze and saw what she was pointing at. The symbols were old, worn smooth by weather and time, but they clearly meant something. "Indian markings?" he asked. "Maybe. But look." Victoria traced one of the symbols with her finger. "This looks like an arrow, and this one, it could be pointing down." She was right. The symbols seemed to indicate something below the platform. Victoria crept to the edge and looked over. "There's another ledge about 10 feet down," she said, "and I think I see a cave opening." "You think that's what the markings are pointing to?" "Only one way to find out." They could hear Marcus's men getting closer, their voices echoing off the rock walls. In a few minutes they'd reach the platform. Jacob looked at the rope still coiled on his belt. It was long enough to reach the lower ledge, but in his condition he wasn't sure he could make the climb down. "Victoria, I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. "Take the rope and go down to that cave. If it's deep enough you can hide there until they give up looking." "What about you?" "I'll stay here. Try to hold them off as long as I can." Victoria stared at him for a moment, then shook her head. "No, we go together or not at all." "Damn it, woman, be practical. I'm bleeding to death anyway. At least this way you have a chance." "And what about my $50,000? You can't spend it if you're dead." Despite everything, Jacob found himself smiling. "You drive a hard bargain." Then it's settled. We go down together. Victoria tied the rope around a sturdy outcropping and tested it carefully. Then she helped Jacob to the edge. "Can you hold on with one arm?" she asked. "Guess we'll find out." The climb down was agonizing. Every movement sent fire through Jacob's wounded shoulder, and more than once he nearly lost his grip on the rope. But Victoria climbed beside him, supporting him when his strength failed. They reached the lower ledge just as Marcus's voice echoed from above. "Where the hell did they go?" Victoria quickly untied the rope and pulled it down, coiling it quietly beside the cave opening. Then she helped Jacob into the darkness beyond. The cave was deeper than it had appeared from above, stretching back into the mountain. Ancient drawings covered the walls. Animals, hunters, symbols that spoke of people who had lived and died here long before the first white man ever saw these mountains. "This place is old," Victoria whispered. "Really old." They moved deeper into the cave, feeling their way in the darkness. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Faint light filtered down from somewhere above, probably another opening higher up the mountain. And that's when they saw it. The chamber was filled with treasure. Not gold or silver, but something far more valuable in this wilderness: weapons. Dozens of rifles, cases of ammunition, barrels of gunpowder. All of it carefully stored and preserved as if someone had been preparing for a war. "Jesus," Jacob breathed. "What is this place?" Victoria was examining some of the rifles. They were new, high-quality weapons that would cost a fortune in any store. "These aren't old," she said. "Someone's been using this cave recently."
That's when they heard the footsteps. Someone was coming through the passage behind them, moving quietly but not quietly enough. Jacob grabbed one of the rifles and checked the action. It was loaded and ready. A figure appeared in the passage opening, silhouetted against the dim light filtering in from outside. Jacob raised the rifle, then stopped. It wasn't one of Marcus's men. It was a woman older than Victoria, with graying hair and clothes that marked her as frontier-born and bred. She carried a rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been using firearms her entire life. "Well," she said, looking them over. "Looks like we have visitors." Behind her, two more figures appeared. Men, also armed, also watching Jacob and Victoria with careful eyes. "Ma'am," Jacob said slowly, keeping his own rifle lowered. "We're just taking shelter. We'll move on as soon as—" "No, you won't," the woman interrupted. She stepped into the chamber, and in the better light Jacob could see her face clearly. She was maybe 50 years old, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. "You're Jacob Hartwell, and you're Victoria Ashford." Jacob's blood ran cold. "How do you know our names?" The woman smiled. "Because we've been waiting for you." Victoria stepped closer to Jacob. "Who are you?" "My name is Catherine Morrison, and Mr. Hartwell. Miss Ashford, you are in considerably more danger than you realize." "What kind of danger?" Jacob asked. Catherine gestured for them to sit on some wooden crates that had been arranged like chairs. "The kind that comes from carrying $10 million worth of inheritance documents while being chased by one of the most corrupt men in the territory." Jacob and Victoria exchanged glances. "You know about the inheritance." "We know about a lot of things, including the fact that Marcus Ashford has been systematically looting that inheritance for years, and that he's killed at least 6 people to keep his crimes secret." Victoria's face went white. 6 people. Catherine nodded grimly. "Your father wasn't the first member of your family to die under mysterious circumstances, and you won't be the last if Marcus gets his hands on you." "Are you saying my father was murdered?" "I'm saying your father discovered what Marcus was doing and threatened to expose him. 3 days later he died of a sudden heart attack. Very convenient timing." Jacob was trying to process this information. "Who are you people? How do you know all this?" Catherine looked at the 2 men who'd come with her. They nodded slightly. "We're federal agents," she said. "We've been investigating Marcus Ashford's activities for over a year. The problem is we haven't been able to prove anything. All the evidence has been destroyed, and all the witnesses have died or disappeared. Until now," one of the men added. "Miss Ashford, those documents you're carrying, they're the key to everything. With them we can finally bring Marcus to justice." Victoria clutched her leather pouch tighter. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know you're not working for Marcus?" It was a fair question. In the past few days Victoria had been lied to by almost everyone she'd met. Trust wasn't something she could afford to give easily. Catherine reached into her coat and pulled out a badge. "Agent Catherine Morrison, Department of the Treasury. We've been tracking Marcus's illegal activities across 3 states. She handed the badge to Jacob, who examined it carefully. It looked real, but he'd never seen a federal agent's badge before. "Even if you are federal agents," Victoria said, "why should I trust you with my inheritance? How do I know you won't just confiscate it?" "Because we don't want your money, Miss Ashford. We want Marcus. The inheritance is legally yours and we'll help you claim it. But first we need to make sure you live long enough to see a courtroom." As if summoned by her words, the sound of voices echoed from the cave entrance. Marcus and his men had found the lower ledge. "They're here," Jacob said, raising his rifle. Catherine and her agents moved with practiced efficiency. They took positions near the chamber entrance, their weapons trained on the passage. "Miss Ashford," Catherine whispered, "how many men does Marcus have with him?" 6, maybe 7. "We can handle those odds, but I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens, you protect those documents. They're the only evidence we have." The voices were getting closer. Jacob could hear Marcus giving orders, directing his men to search every inch of the cave system. "There's another way out," Catherine said quietly. "A passage at the back of this chamber that leads to a different part of the mountain. But it's narrow and dangerous. More dangerous than staying here?" Victoria asked. Catherine looked toward the cave entrance, where the voices were getting louder. "No, definitely not more dangerous than staying here." She led them to the back of the chamber, where a crack in the rock face opened into another passage. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "This leads to an old mine shaft about a quarter-mile away," Catherine explained. "If you can reach it, you'll come out near the main road to Denver." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. Buy you time to get to Denver." Catherine pressed a piece of paper into Victoria's hand. "This is the address of our field office in Denver. Ask for Agent William Patterson. Tell him Morrison sent you." The sound of gunfire echoed through the cave as Marcus's men encountered the first of Catherine's defensive positions. "Go," Catherine shouted. "Now." Jacob squeezed through the narrow crack first, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Victoria followed, clutching her precious documents. Behind them the sound of battle grew louder. The passage was a nightmare of sharp rocks and tight spaces. In some places they had to crawl on their bellies. In others the ceiling was so low they could barely crouch. Jacob's shoulder was bleeding again, leaving a trail of red drops on the stone floor. But they kept moving. After what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, they saw light ahead. The passage opened into another cave mouth, this one overlooking a steep slope covered with loose rock. Below them, perhaps a mile away, they could see a road winding through the valley. "There," Victoria said, pointing. "That's the Denver road." Getting down the slope without starting a rock slide was treacherous work. They moved slowly, testing each step, trying to avoid the loose stones that would give way under their weight. Halfway down they heard an explosion from somewhere behind them. The sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. "The weapons cache," Jacob said grimly. "Catherine must have blown it up to keep it out of Marcus's hands." Victoria's face was pale. "Do you think she made it out?" Jacob didn't answer. He'd seen enough battles to know that someone who stayed behind to buy time for others usually didn't make it out alive. They reached the road just as a stagecoach came into view, heading toward Denver. Jacob stepped into the road and flagged it down. The driver was a grizzled old man who looked like he'd been running this route for 20 years. He took one look at Jacob's bloody shirt and Victoria's torn clothes and shook his head. "Mister, I don't know what kind of trouble you folks are in, but I don't want any part of it. We can pay," Victoria said, pulling out the ruby necklace. "This is worth more than your coach and horses combined." The driver's eyes widened when he saw the jewelry. After a moment's consideration he nodded toward the coach door. "Get in, but if shooting starts you're on your own." As they climbed into the coach, Jacob caught sight of smoke rising from the mountains behind them. The cave, the weapons, everything was burning. "Do you think Marcus survived?" Victoria asked. "Men like Marcus always survive," Jacob said. "But he's lost his advantage. Those federal agents will have evidence now, witnesses. Even if Catherine didn't make it, her people will know what happened." The coach ride to Denver took 6 hours. Jacob spent most of it unconscious, finally succumbing to blood loss and exhaustion. Victoria held him as he slept, watching the landscape roll by outside the window. But she wasn't just watching the scenery. She was thinking about everything that had happened. Everything she'd learned about her family, her inheritance, and the man who tried to kill her for it. And she was planning. When they reached Denver, Jacob was barely conscious. Victoria helped him out of the coach and into the first hotel they could find. She paid for a room with one of her mother's rings and had the hotel doctor tend to Jacob's wound. While the doctor worked, Victoria sat by the window, staring out at the bustling city street. Denver was bigger than any place she'd ever seen, full of people who didn't know her story or care about her problems. It was the perfect place to disappear, but disappearing wasn't what she had in mind. Jacob slept for 12 hours straight. When he finally woke up, Victoria was sitting beside his bed, fully dressed and looking like she'd made some kind of decision. "How do you feel?" she asked. Jacob tested his shoulder carefully. It was stiff and sore, but the bleeding had stopped. "Like I've been shot, but I'll live." He looked at her more closely. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know. More determined, I guess." Victoria smiled, but there was something hard in it. "I've been thinking, Jacob, about what we do next. We find that lawyer, Henderson, get your inheritance back." "No, we do more than that." Victoria stood up and walked to the window. "Marcus Ashford has been stealing from my family for 5 years. He's killed people to cover his tracks. He nearly killed both of us, and the federal agents will handle it, will they?" Victoria turned to face him. "What if Marcus has judges in his pocket? What if he has connections we don't know about? What if he finds a way to make this all go away?" Jacob could see where this was going. "Victoria, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to make sure Marcus Ashford never hurts anyone ever again." "That sounds like revenge, does it? Or does it sound like justice?" Before Jacob could answer, there was a knock at the door. Victoria went to answer it, her hand moving instinctively toward the small gun she carried. But it wasn't Marcus or his men. It was a well-dressed man in his 50s with kind eyes and a lawman's bear. Miss Ashford, I'm Agent Patterson. Agent Morrison sent word that you might be coming to see me. Victoria felt a wave of relief wash over her. Catherine had survived after all. Agent Morrison, is she all right? Patterson's expression grew somber. She's alive but badly injured. The explosion in the cave caught her and her team in a rock slide. She's in a hospital in Colorado Springs. And Marcus, also alive, and very angry. Patterson entered the room and closed the door behind him. Miss Ashford, we need to talk. The situation is more complicated than you realize. Jacob struggled to sit up in bed. How complicated? Patterson pulled up a chair and sat down. We arrested 3 of Marcus's men at the cave site. Under questioning, they revealed some disturbing information. What kind of information? Marcus Ashford isn't working alone. He's part of a larger organization that's been systematically looting mining fortunes across the West. Your inheritance is just one of several they've targeted. Victoria felt the room spin. How many others? At least 12 families that we know of, maybe more. The organization is well-funded, well-connected, and utterly ruthless. They call themselves the Territory Development Company, but they're really just organized thieves. Jacob leaned forward. What does that mean for Victoria? It means that even if we arrest Marcus, the organization will send someone else. They've invested too much in this scheme to just walk away. Victoria sat down heavily on the bed. So I'll never be safe, not unless we can bring down the entire organization. Patterson looked at her intently. Which is where you come in, Miss Ashford. Me? How? Those documents, they're not just proof of your inheritance. They're evidence of how the organization operates. If we can use them to trace the money flow, we might be able to expose the entire network. Victoria clutched her leather pouch protectively. And then what? I testify in court and hope they don't kill me before the trial. We have a better plan than that. Patterson smiled grimly. We want you to help us set a trap. Jacob didn't like the sound of that. What kind of trap? Marcus thinks you're both dead. The explosion at the cave, the rock slide, from his perspective, his problem is solved. But what if you suddenly reappear? What if Victoria publicly announced her intention to claim her? He'd come after us again, Jacob said. Exactly, but this time we'd be ready for him. We'd have agents in place, evidence collectors, witnesses. When Marcus makes his move, we'll have everything we need to arrest, not just him but his whole organization. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, thinking it over. And if something goes wrong, if your trap fails, then you'll be dead. And the Territory Development Company will continue stealing from mining families for years to come. It wasn't much of a choice, really. Victoria could run and hide, spending her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could stand and fight, risking everything to stop Marcus and his organization once and for all. What exactly would you need me to do? She asked. Patterson pulled out a folded piece of paper. Tomorrow morning, the Denver Herald is going to publish this story. He handed her the paper. The headline read, Mining Heiress Survives Assassination Attempt. Victoria read the article quickly. It told most of her story. The inheritance, Marcus's attempts to have her declared insane, the chase through the mountains, but it also added some fictional details. According to this, I'm staying at the Grand Hotel under federal protection, which you will be starting tonight. We'll surround the hotel with agents, making it look like we're taking every precaution to keep you safe. But it's a trap. The hotel is a trap. But Marcus won't attack the hotel. It's too well defended. He'll wait for you to leave, then strike when you're vulnerable. Jacob understood now. And when Victoria leaves the hotel, she'll have a federal escort that's designed to look impressive but actually be penetrable. Marcus will see an opportunity and take it. When he does, we'll be waiting. Victoria looked at Jacob. What do you think? Jacob studied her face. In the past few days she'd gone from a scared girl running from her cousin to a woman planning to take down an entire criminal organization. The transformation was remarkable. I think, he said slowly, that you're not really asking for my opinion. You've already decided. Victoria smiled. You know me pretty well for someone I just met. So we're doing this. We're doing this.
Victoria turned to Patterson. But I have conditions. Name them. First, Jacob gets full federal protection. He saved my life. I won't let him be killed because of it. Agreed. Second, when this is over and the Territory Development Company is destroyed, I want a full accounting of everything they've stolen, every family they've robbed, every person they've killed. I want to use my inheritance to make restitutions. Patterson raised an eyebrows. Miss Ashford, that could cost millions of dollars. I'll still have millions left over, and it's the right thing to do. Agreed. Victoria took a deep breath. Then let's bring down Marcus Ashford. The trap was set for 3 days later. Victoria's story had been front-page news in every paper in Colorado. The headline, "Mining Heiress Declares War on Cousin," was particularly popular. By all accounts, she was staying at the Grand Hotel preparing to file legal documents that would expose Marcus's crimes and reclaim her inheritance. What the papers didn't report was that Victoria wasn't really at the Grand Hotel. She was at a safe house across town working with federal agents to plan every detail of the trap. Marcus has taken the bait, Patterson reported on the third day. Our informants say he's gathered at least 20 men. They're planning to hit your convoy on the way to the courthouse. Victoria nodded. She was dressed in traveling clothes, ready to play her part in the elaborate deception they'd constructed. Where will they strike? There's a stretch of road about 2 miles from the courthouse where the buildings thin out. Perfect place for an ambush. We'll have agents positioned there, but they'll stay hidden until Marcus commits himself. Jacob checked his rifle for the 10th time. His shoulder was still stiff, but he could shoot well enough. How many agents? 30, plus you and Miss Ashford. 32 against 20. Good odds. Patterson looked grim. Would be if we knew for sure. Marcus only has 20 men, but the Territory Development Company has resources we're still learning about. At precisely 10 o'clock that morning, Victoria's convoy left the Grand Hotel. It looked impressive. A fancy carriage surrounded by 6 mounted federal agents, with Patterson riding alongside as the visible commander. What it actually was bait. The real Victoria was in a plain wagon a quarter-mile behind, dressed as a frontier woman traveling with her husband. Jacob sat beside her, his rifle hidden under a blanket. The plan was simple. When Marcus attacked the decoy convoy, Victoria and Jacob would circle around behind his men while the federal agents closed the trap from the front. Simple plans Jacob had learned rarely worked the way they were supposed to. The first sign of trouble was when they spotted riders on the hills overlooking the ambush site. Too many riders. Patterson was right, Jacob said, counting the men through his spyglass. Marcus brought more than 20. Victoria counted carefully. I see at least 40, maybe 50. That changed everything. Patterson's 30 agents would be outnumbered almost 2 to 1. Even with the element of surprise, those weren't good odds. We should signal Patterson, Victoria said. Call off the trap. But it was too late. As they watched Marcus's men open fire on the decoy convoy, the battle had begun. Patterson and his agents fought well, but they were outnumbered and caught in a crossfire. Within minutes it was clear they were in serious trouble. We have to help them, Victoria said. Jacob was already loading his rifle. Stay with the wagon. This is about to get very bad. But Victoria wasn't planning to stay with the wagon. As Jacob rode toward the battle, she grabbed the spare rifle and followed on foot. The fight was chaos. Gunsmoke filled the air and the sound of gunfire echoed off the surrounding hill. Jacob could see Patterson's men falling back, trying to reach better cover. That's when Victoria did something that surprised everyone. She walked straight into the middle of the battlefield. Marcus Ashford, she shouted, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of gunfire. I'm right here. The shooting stopped. Every man on both sides turned to stare at her. Marcus himself appeared from behind a cluster of rocks, his gun drawn but not quite pointed at her. Victoria, he said, I was wondering when you'd show yourself. Here I am. You want me? Come and get me. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, I intend to. But first I think you should know. You've cost me a great deal of money and trouble. Good. I hope it was expensive. More than you know. But it doesn't matter. In a few minutes you'll be dead, and I'll have those documents you've been carrying around. Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out the leather pouch. These documents. Marcus's eyes fixated on the pouch. Those documents. The ones that prove you've been stealing from my family for 5 years, among other things. Victoria looked around at the battlefield, at the federal agents trapped behind cover, at Marcus's men with their guns trained on everyone. You know what's funny, Marcus? She said. You never bothered to actually read these documents, did you? Marcus frowned. What are you talking about? If you had read them, you'd know about the clause my father added just before he died. The clause about what happens if anyone tries to harm me. You're bluffing. Victoria pulled a document from the pouch and held it up. This is an amendment to his will, witnessed and notarized. It says that if anyone tries to harm me or prevent me from claiming my inheritance, the entire estate goes to the federal government. Marcus's face went white. That's impossible, is it? My father was a careful man, Marcus, and he didn't trust you. Victoria smiled now. So here's the situation. If you kill me, you get nothing. The government gets everything. All $10 million. The silence stretched across the battlefield like a taut wire. Marcus was thinking, calculating, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. Even if that's true, he said finally, I can't let you live. You know too much. About the Territory Development Company. About the other families you've robbed. Victoria took a step closer. Oh, Marcus, I know a lot more than you think. I know. She pulled another document from the pouch. I know about the Hendersons in Montana, the Carlyles in Nevada, the Weatherbys in Arizona, all of them dead, all of them robbed by your organization. Marcus's gun hand was starting to shake. How could you possibly know about that? Because Agent Morrison survived the cave explosion. Because 3 of your men talked when they were arrested. Because the federal government has been investigating you for over a year. Victoria's voice was strong now, confident. It's over, Marcus. The Territory Development Company is finished. That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. He looked around at his men, trying to gauge their loyalty in the face of this new information. And in that moment of distraction, Jacob put a bullet right between his eyes. The shot echoed across the battlefield like a thunderclap. Marcus crumpled to the ground dead before he hit the dirt. For a moment nobody moved. Then one of Marcus's men threw down his rifle. I ain't dying for no dead man, he said. Within minutes it was over. Marcus's men surrendered. The federal agents emerged from cover, and the Territory Development Company's operations in Colorado came to an end. 3 months later, Victoria Ashford stood in the parlor of her father's mansion in Denver, looking out at the city where she'd nearly died. But she wasn't the same frightened girl who'd been trapped in that mine shaft. She was a woman of business now, using her reclaimed fortune to rebuild the lives that Marcus and his organization had destroyed. Jacob sat in a chair by the fireplace reading a letter from Agent Patterson. His shoulder had healed, but he walked with a slight limp now. A souvenir from the final battle. Good news from Patterson, he said. They arrested the last of the Territory Development Company leaders in California last week. It's really over. Victoria nodded. And the Hendersons in Montana. Their ranch has been restored. The money you sent will help them rebuild. Victoria turned from the window. Jacob, I want to ask you something. What's that? That first day when you found me in the mine. Why did you help me? Really? Jacob thought about it. I told you. Seemed like the right thing to do. That's all. That's all. Victoria smiled. You know you never did collect your $50,000. Jacob shrugged. Figured you needed it more than I did. I did, but I still owe you. Victoria walked over to him and placed an envelope on his lap. What's that? Your $50,000, plus interest. Jacob opened the envelope and stared at the bank draft inside. It was made out for $60,000. Victoria, this is too much. No, it's not nearly enough. You saved my life, Jacob. You helped me bring down a criminal organization. You gave me a chance to set things right. She sat down across from him. $60,000 is nothing compared to that. Jacob folded the bank draft and put it in his pocket. What will you do now? Victoria looked around the elegant room with its expensive furniture and artwork. I'm thinking of selling this place. It's too big for one person and it holds too many bad memories. Where would you go? I was thinking about buying a ranch. Somewhere quiet where I could raise horses and maybe some cattle. Nothing too fancy, just peaceful. Jacob smiled. That sounds nice. Would you like to see it? See what? The ranch I'm thinking of buying. It's about 50 miles north of here in beautiful country. Wide open spaces, good water, plenty of room to start over. Jacob studied her face. Victoria, are you asking me to come with you? I'm asking if you'd like to be partners. I've got the money, you've got the experience. We could build something good together. Jacob thought about it. He'd been drifting for so long, never staying in one place, never building anything that would last. The idea of having a home, a real home, was appealing. Partners, he said. I like the sound of that. Victoria smiled. And for the first time since he'd met her, it was a smile without shadows or secrets behind it. Then it settled. We'll be ranchers. As they sat in the comfortable silence of the mansion's parlor watching the sun set over Denver, Jacob couldn't help but think about how much their lives had changed. A few months ago he'd been a drifter with $2.50 to his name. Now he was a wealthy man with a partner and a future. But the most important thing wasn't the money or the ranch or even the satisfaction of seeing justice done. The most important thing was that he'd learned something about himself in those dangerous days on the mountain trails. He'd learned that when it came down to it, he was the kind of man who would risk everything to do the right thing. And that was worth more than all the gold in Colorado territory. 5 years later, the Double H Ranch, named for Hartwell and the woman who kept her father's name of Ashford, but had become Victoria Hartwell after a simple wedding ceremony in the Denver courthouse, was one of the most successful spreads in the territory. They raised the finest horses in Colorado, sold cattle to markets as far away as Chicago, and had built a reputation for fair dealing and honest work. But more than that, they'd built a life together. A life based on trust, respect, and the kind of partnership that comes from facing down death and coming out the other side stronger. And sometimes on quiet evenings when they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Victoria would tell Jacob about the nightmares she used to have. About the mine shaft, about Marcus, about the terrible fear of being trapped and helpless. I don't have those dreams anymore, she would say. And Jacob, who had his own nightmares about different battles and different fears, would nod and understand. Because they'd both learned something important in those desperate days when a man with $2.50 had heard a voice calling from the darkness. They'd learned that sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice, the smart choice, or even the profitable choice. Sometimes the right choice is just the choice to help when help is needed, to stand when others fall, and to believe that one person's courage can change everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that choice leads you home.